series of forensic science lecture. Today we are going to discuss about forensics of fiber analysis. In this lecture we will discuss about what is fiber, how fiber as an evidence is important, what is the difference between natural fibers and man-made fibers, and various techniques to identify fiber which is found at the crime scene. To start with, we will go what is fiber. Fiber, when we talk about, it is the smallest unit of a textile material that has a length many times greater than its diameter. That means it is elongated and its diameter is very much less compared to its length. Fibers, when we discuss, they can occur naturally as well as they can be man-made. The natural fibers which we talk about is from plants, animals or certain minerals. But synthetically, when man synthesize certain fibers, they are called as synthetic fibers or man-made fibers. A fiber can be spun with other fibers to form a yarn, and that can be woven or knitted to form a fabric. So, whenever we are talking about a fabric or any cloth evidence, we further go for the analysis of fibers from which that particular cloth is made up of. We look for the cross section, we check that how many cross sections of fibers are there in that particular cloth piece, and that how we analyze cloth evidence as well as a fiber evidence. The type and length of fiber used, the type of spinning method, the type of fabric construction all affect the transfer of fibers and the significance of fiber associations. So, when we are talking about the transfer of fibers from the criminal to the crime scene or victim or criminal, if there is any transfer, that happens on the basis of the Locard's principle of exchange. So, whenever any suspect or any criminal comes in contact with anything at the crime scene, he might leave any fiber evidence there, and that fiber can be analyzed to link that particular criminal to that particular crime scene. So, fibers, whenever we gather it as an evidence at the crime scene, we can collect those fibers with the help of tweezers, tape or a vacuum. Generally, the fiber as an evidence, they come from clothing, drapery, wigs or any carpet if there is furniture, or blankets, bed sheets, etc. For analysis of these fibers, we have to first determine whether these fibers are natural in nature or they are manufactured. That means whether they are made by man or they exist naturally, or sometimes it happens that it could be a combination of natural fiber or man-made fiber. Another important thing which we have to keep in mind when we are talking about the fiber evidence at the crime scene is the number of fibers. The number of fibers on the clothing of a victim identified as matching the clothing of a suspect is important whenever we are determining the actual contact. If you have found a very large number of fibers, the more likely that the contact occurred between these individuals. So, to discuss the forensics of fiber analysis, we discuss about the cross transfers of fiber which often occur in cases in which there is a person to person contact. So, as we spoke about the Locard's principle, if any person comes in contact with anything, whether it could be the place from where he is entering. So, in the most cases when we discuss, let's imagine a case of a robbery where the criminal is entering through a narrow door or a narrow window, he is making an entry through that. So, there are chances that his clothes might get stuck somewhere. So, that is one place where you can get a piece of cloth which is made up of fibers, or you can get separate fibers also. We as investigators, we hope that the fiber traceable back to the offender and can be found at the crime scene as well as vice versa. Success in solving crimes often hinge on the ability to narrow down the sources for the type of the fibers which are found at the crime scene. So, supposedly we have found certain fibers at the crime scene and they belong to a certain color. They belong to yellow color, green color. So, we look for the suspects which might be wearing the same color clothes on that particular day when the crime has happened. It could also be argued that the large volume of fibers produced reduces the significance of a fiber association discovered in a criminal case. So, let us consider the volume of textiles produced worldwide each year. The number of textiles produced with any one fiber type and color is extremely small. So, that means the fiber evidence which we are encountering at the crime scene, the significance of that fiber associating it with certain suspect would be very less, and if by luck we are finding certain evidence, fiber evidence at the crime scene, that would be of great importance to connecting it with further suspects or the criminal. So, the likelihood of two or more manufacturers exactly duplicating all the aspects is extremely remote, because if we are imagining that a certain fiber they have procured from nature and they have mixed the synthetic fiber in it. So, firstly when we look for the percentage of the natural fiber and the synthetic fiber may vary. They may add 20% natural, 80% synthetic fiber, or they may add a different percentage. So, that is one big point of difference where we can say that it cannot be duplicated. Second, the dye which they are using. The dye of different manufacturers, they cannot be replicated. It would be different if they are adding a red color dye, that would be maybe different manufacturing dyes from different companies. Then we can add additives also. Additives would be different, fillers will be different. That's how the whole composition of fiber may vary, and the manufacturers they cannot exactly duplicate that, which is very good for the forensic experts when they have to trace back the origin of that particular fiber. The problem with the fiber evidence is that they are not unique. For example, when we say unlike fingerprints or DNA, they cannot pinpoint to the offender. Supposedly, the criminal is wearing a t-shirt which is of a particular brand, and the fibers which are being used in that particular brand is used by brand for other textiles also. So, we cannot correlate that he is the criminal who has wearing this fiber, because that particular same brand fibers can be worn by many other people. So, in that cases we can say fiber is not an evidence which is similar or like fingerprints or DNA, it is not unique, but it may help to relate it to any suspect or criminal if we have other evidences along with the fiber evidence. So, we can say to a certain extent that the fiber can corroborate or something unique to the fibers that set them apart, and it can be used as a corroborative evidence. So, going with that, if we have to go for the forensic identification of the fibers, we must first know the classification of fibers. On the basis of the source of fibers, we can classify them as natural fibers and man-made fibers. So, if we are talking about the natural fibers, the fibers obtained naturally from both plants and animals are termed as natural fibers. These fibers are hair-like raw material which are directly obtained from different plants and animals. So, natural fibers, they have the following characteristics. They can be twisted into yarn to make a fabric. They are very comfortable and durable. They are strong, highly capable of absorbing moisture, and they provide an excellent look and feel. So, natural fibers, they are further divided into three categories. They can be plant fibers, animal fibers, or mineral fibers. So, plant fibers is the fibers which have obtained from the plant sources like cotton, jute, the materials like bamboo, coconut fiber, flax seeds, cannabis sativa plant species, vegetable fibers, etc. These are the different sources of plant fibers. So, whenever we are obtaining any fiber from plants, we have to synthesize it to make into a fabric. So, the process which we are making the natural fibers, we can say it is a naturally fiber occurring cloth. But if any fiber is made in the lab with the help of chemical procedures, that come into man-made or synthetic fibers. After plant fibers, we have animal fibers. the fibers which are obtained from the animal sources, for example wool and silk. These animal fibers, they consist of proteins. Animal fibers could be example like given by sheep, camel, cashmere, goats, rabbits, and certain places where animals like yak are found, the fibers from the yaks are also used to make some textile or clothes. In the hilly mountain regions where it is very easy to find animals like yak, their wool is used to make certain jackets or certain sweaters. Silk is a very common fiber which we know is obtained from the silkworms. The mineral fibers, when we talk about, there are certain naturally occurring minerals like asbestos. When the fiber is being provided from them, these are known as the mineral fibers. The major use of the mineral fibers is that they are used in the industrial applications, and these fibers are generally resistant to fire as well as acid. Thus, they can be used in industry. So, when we talk about the natural, they can be further divided into plant, animal and mineral fibers. Now, coming to the next fibers, which are the man-made fibers. The man-made fibers which are synthesized in the labs from various monomers, and we make the polymer units of that. Man-made fibers, if we go by the definition, these fibers are artificially synthesized by humans within the industry. That means the polymers are designed to make fabrics by the application of simple chemicals. What are these polymers? These polymers are basically macromolecules which are obtained or composed of joining small repeated subunits together. These subunits are known as monomers. The best examples when we talk about the man-made fibers, they are rayon and nylon, and other fibers which are man-made are acrylic, polyester and acetate. So, if we are talking about the man-made fibers, they are further divided into three categories: regenerated fibers, synthetic fibers and inorganic fibers. Regenerated fibers are those fibers which are semi-synthetic. Semi-synthetic fibers means that the cellulose is obtained from plants and that is further purified and fibers are produced from it. These fibers are made of long chain polymers and modified by a chemical process to enable polymerization so that synthetic fibers can be formed. So, regenerated fibers, their basic material is natural, but it is further mixed with certain chemicals. So, viscous rayon, bamboo, these are the examples of regenerated fibers. Whereas synthetic fibers, they are totally chemical based fibers which are made by humans, formed by the polymerization of monomers. Once a polymer is formed, it is converted into a fluid form and the dissolved or molten polymer is extruded through narrow holes through which we get filaments, and these filaments we call them as synthetic fibers. Synthetic fibers example of polyester, acrylic, nylon. Now, the third category which comes into the man-made fibers is inorganic fibers. Inorganic fibers are also known as the metallic fibers, and they are generally obtained from like metals like copper, silver, gold, and they can be extruded from nickel, iron, etc. So, talking about the man-made fibers, three categories we learnt about: the regenerated, synthetic and inorganic fibers. So, difference between these both fibers is they come naturally and the manufactured, they are made from the long chain of molecules called polymers. So, whenever we have to analyze certain fibers, their structure appears different under the microscope. For example, if we look at the cotton fibers, many different natural fibers, they originate from plants and animals, and when we have to identify those fibers, we can, the first test which we do is the visual examination, where we look for the color of the fiber and then looking for how the fibers look like. As you can see in the picture, this is how a cotton fiber appears under a microscope. Similarly, we can see and we can look for other animal fibers also, or the synthetic fibers also, which have different shapes and they appear differently under the microscope. Cotton fibers, they are the plant fibers which are most commonly used in textile materials. Here we can differentiate by the type of cotton, the fiber length and the degree of twist contributing to the diversity of these fibers. That means different cotton fibers have different fiber lengths and the degree of twist will be different, and we can analyze this, write about the degree of twist, and we can differentiate between all these different types of fibers. Other fibers which are plant fibers are flax, through which the linen fabric is made, ramai, sisal, jute, hemp, coir. These are the examples of different plant fibers. So, this is how a flax fiber looks when we look under the polarized light microscope. Polarized light microscope basically work on the optical properties of fiber when we have to go for the analysis using birefringence or refractive index. So, refractive index of different fibers are different, which we will later study in the examination of fibers. The identification of less common plant fibers at a crime scene or on the clothing of a suspect or victim would have increased significance, because a fiber which is combination of natural as well as man-made would have more differences and thus helps in the identification to its source or origin. After plant fibers, we go into the animal fibers. Wool is the most frequently used in the production of textile materials. The most common wool fibers, they originate from the sheep. That is how a wool fiber look like under a microscope. The first test which we conduct at a forensic science laboratory is the microscopy test, where we look different types of fibers under different microscopes to know about their structure, their color, their twisting, their shape, etc. Finer woolen fibers are used in the production of clothing, and those fibers which are coarse in nature, they are found in the carpet or certain bed sheets also. Fiber diameter and degree of scale, protrusion of the fibers are other important characteristics through which we determine whether the fiber is a finer category or a coarser category. Apart from the wool, there are certain other examples of animal fibers, which includes hairs from camel, alpaca, cashmere, mohair and others. So, the fibers originated from the hairs of these animals are further used to make cashmere sweaters, mohair sweaters, or from the camel hairs we can use various other fabrics. Identification of less common animal fibers at a crime scene or the clothing of suspect always have an increased significance, because it would be very difficult to find certain animal fibers at certain places. So, that will give the forensic scientist an edge where they can find very less common fibers at the crime scene. So, after the analysis of the natural fibers, we go for the man-made fibers. More than half of all fibers in the production of textile materials are man-made. This is how the cross section of a man-made fibers look like. Some man-made fibers, they originate from natural materials such as cotton or wood, and we can call them man-made because we mix certain amount of synthetic fibers with these natural fibers. So, they come under the category of man-made fibers. Other man-made fibers, they are synthetic materials and they are completely made in lab. So, we can go for various microscopic techniques to further differentiate between these different types of fibers. Polyester and nylon are the most commonly encountered man-made fibers, which is followed by acrylics, rayons and acetates. There are also many other less common man-made fibers, and the amount of production of a particular man-made fiber and its end use influence the degree of rarity of a given fiber. For example, like alpaca fibers, which are very less common in India, and if you encounter such kind of fiber at the crime scene, then you must relate it to certain person who has bought certain clothes from a different country, which would help you in narrowing down list of the suspect. So, looking at the cross section of a man-made fibers, they can be viewed under the scanning electron microscope. As we can see the cross sectional views of a nylon carpet fibers under scanning electron microscope. So, the images we can differentiate using different microscopy. Now, coming to the next thing about the cross sections of this, we can usually have the cross section of different fibers and we can examine them under the microscope. Usual cross section encounters through examination can add increased significance to a fiber association. If a fiber is very thick, we can take the cross section of that fiber and we can see it under the microscope to look how that particular fiber is visible under the microscope. Now, another important point is the location of fiber, where the fiber is found at the crime scene. Where the fibers are found affects the value placed on a particular fiber association. The location of fibers on different areas of the body or at the specific item of the crime scene influences the significance of the fiber association. For examples, in the cases of sexual assaults or in the cases of rape, burglary, the location fiber would be very different. We have seen in the cases of burglary, mostly the entrance of the criminal is a forced entry. So, that forced entry could be from the back door or from a window. So, the fiber could be located at such places. In the cases of rape or any sexual offences, we have to look for the hands of the victim where she might have captured certain fibers from the criminal's clothing. So, depending upon where the fiber is being encountered, it tells us about the significance of the fiber association with the further suspect. So, when we are going for the forensic analysis of the fibers, we have very limited number of fibers to work with. In some cases, we just get one fiber from the crime scene. So, our major aim is to use non-destructive test so that we can get the maximum information without destroying our samples. In any evidence analysis in forensics, our main aim should be the non-destruction of the sample. So, in certain cases, when you have just one fiber, we will aim for those techniques where the sample used is very less if the technique is destructive, and if this technique is non-destructive, then they are being used primarily. Certain non-destructive techniques which we use for the fiber analysis are microscopic analysis or the IR microspectrophotometry. Analysis like TLC or the pyrolysis GCMS, they destroy our evidence. So, they should be used at the last and not the whole sample should be used. A part of the sample should be used so that if we do not receive any conclusive results, we have enough sample to go for another techniques. So, whatever we have gathered from the crime scene is compared against fibers from the suspect source, and those the crime scene fibers and the suspect fibers, they are being matched. The suspect fibers can be taken directly from the suspect, or sometimes the fibers can be found at the car seat or in the home. Fibers are mostly laid side by side for visual inspection through a microscope so that we can get details of both the fibers together. The important considerations which we have to keep in mind, as in the length of time between the actual physical contact and the collection of clothing items from the suspect or victim, and if the victim is immobile, very little fiber loss will take place, whereas the suspect's clothing will lose transferred fibers quickly. So, we have to differentiate also whether the fiber evidence which is found at the crime scene, it belongs to the victim or it belongs to the suspect, and we have to look for that consideration. The likelihood of finding transferred fibers on the clothing of the suspect a day after the alleged contact may be remote. Therefore, depending on the subsequent use or handling of that particular clothing. So, when we are going for the fiber analysis at the crime scene, the fiber which is collected from the crime scene, it should be collected using with the help of a tweezer, and it should be packed in a brown paper envelope or it should be packed in a druggist fold. So, in short, the fiber analyst compares various things, as we have said that the techniques should be destructive. So, if we are looking for the shape, dye content, size, chemical composition and microscopic appearance, these all come into the class evidence. Even if fibers from two separate places can be matched via comparison, that does not mean that their source is similar and there is no fiber database that provides a probability of origin of that particular fiber. There are various steps which we have to involve to look for the fiber analysis. We have to compare the color and the diameter, we have to compare the dyes, we have to go for first all the preliminary steps and then the further confirmatory techniques. So, to conclude, we must keep in mind that whenever we are analyzing any fiber evidence, firstly the non-destructive techniques should be used and secondly the confirmatory or destructive techniques should be used, because the sample which we have procured from the crime scene, it cannot be duplicated and we should not waste our sample using the non-destructive techniques first. So, primarily non-destructive techniques and the preliminary techniques should be used to give us the better insights of that particular evidence. Thank you.